From the newsroom of Impact Alpha, I'm Monique Aiken, and this is your Impact Briefing for Friday, June 2nd. Today, I'll chat with Impact Alpha's David Banks about the ownership economy, the ESG backlash, and system-level investing. Hello, David.
Hey, Monique. It's great to be back on the podcast with you.
Yeah, haven't seen you in a while. Welcome. But first, here's what you need to know from the week in impact investing. A political backlash and legal threats are chilling shareholder support for climate action and ESG. Shareholder activists traced the big chill to a March letter to some of the world's largest asset managers from 21 Republican attorneys general that included threats of legal action. Last year, more than 30 shareholder proposals won majority approval. Experts say this year's total won't come close. At ExxonMobil's meeting this week, shareholders voted against most proposals to accelerate cuts of carbon emissions, but did call for an audited report on the financial impact on Exxon of a transition to net zero. In a guest post on Impact Alpha, Manifest Social's Ryan Harms rounded up a hectic month of news from across the ESG battlefield, from Florida to Utah to Washington, D.C. Meanwhile, annual impact reports from Tesla, Warby Parker, and others do tout climate and community solutions. A growing number of corporations are going beyond accounting for the ESG risks themselves to detail the impact their products and services have on employees, communities, and the environment. Impact Alpha rounded up reports from Sunrun, Autodesk, Warby Parker, and 3M. Los Angeles is preparing for cuts in water from the Colorado River. Last week, California, Arizona, Nevada, and 4 other southwestern states agreed to cut water usage from the Colorado River by 14% over the next 3 years in exchange for more than $1.2 billion in federal funds. On cue, LA's Department of Water and Power is issuing a $484 million bond to finance capital improvements to the water system. Impact Alpha is highlighting the bond as part of our ongoing collaboration with HIP Investor to feature upcoming bond issuances with social or environmental significance. And EVs are coming to West Africa in the form of motorbikes. In Ghana, Kofa raised a seed round for its multi-purpose EV batteries. The company runs a battery swapping network for e-motorbike users. Most of the action in EV and battery startups has been in East Africa. Kofa is one of West Africa's early movers. Investors included Mercy Corps Ventures, Wangara Green Ventures, and the Shell Foundation. So, David, it's good to have you back. What's going on lately?
Well, Monique, you mentioned the ESG wars in the headlines, and that's been on our minds this week. And the letter that you mentioned from the state attorneys general contains an interesting argument. And actually, Exxon picked it up in its own recommendations to shareholders. Essentially, it boils down to that the transition to net zero, to the 1.5 degree scenario that's envisioned under the Paris Climate Agreements, because it's not likely to be achieved, therefore it's not material to shareholders. So essentially, it's too late.
It's not too late for the world.
Well, there's that. But it is interesting that this ESG backlash, which had been seen, I think it's by some quarters, that as maybe a midterm election ploy is not going away. There's big money behind it. There's coordination, and it's here to stay, and it does seem to be having an effect, as we said this week in the votes at these shareholder meetings, and I think on asset manager strategies, certainly on their public-facing marketing and whatnot. And there's a phenomenon folks are becoming aware of that of green hushing, sort of the opposite of green washing. For a long time, people were concerned that people were overstating their environmental and climate activities, and now folks seem to be keeping their ESG and climate activities kind of under a barrel so that nobody attacks them for it. So agents of impact, as it were, need to be aware of this and vigilant and muster, as Lisa Wall said in our Q&A, data-driven arguments that make the case.
Well, that is not a positive development, because I think obviously these are material factors and their complexity. It means that the materiality of them is increasing. And then, of course, there's a specter of dynamic materiality, which means the timing of one becoming more material based on the fact of the interconnection between all of these things is likely and unpredictable. So I'd rather there be more data, more disclosure, more information, as well as our acknowledgement of these complex issues and that's partly the work of TIP. But in terms of what's positive going on these days, you also talked about the ownership economy is emerging.
Well, I just wanted to flag that because it is, I think readers of the brief may have noticed that we've added a new theme to our cycle of themes around the ownership economy. We've had a focus this year on muni impact, municipal bonds. You mentioned one of them in the headlines. We've had a long time focus on catalytic capital, and one that we've added recently is the ownership economy, because we just noticed that there was a whole raft of activity, and it goes all the way from home ownership as a strategy. We've had the Deerfield Trust, which has a shared equity strategy around home ownership and is one of many in that regard. There's Partners in Equity, which has a similar strategy around business, commercial real estate ownership for particularly business owners of color, so they can own the buildings that their businesses are in. And not be subject to rent increases or losing their lease or that sort of thing, as well as get obviously the appreciation. And then worker ownership seems to be having a moment. We had Jack Moriarty on last week's podcast, and there's that legislation, but there's also a whole number of funds that are now financing worker ownership. And we decided to round that all up as in a theme around ownership as a way of really kind of tackling the income inequality, wealth generation challenges, make workers owners, make tenants owners, make business proprietors owners, and we think that that's a theme that's going to have some legs. So we've rounded it all up into a landing page and a theme that folks will see in the brief. I just wanted to flag that.
And the other big news this week was the debt ceiling for the United States.
Well, Monique, a lot of ink has been spilled on that. But I will say this, it does certainly highlight systemic or system level risks, which I know is something that you know about at TIP.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, TIP is trying to connect systems thinking with investors. And, one of the things that I take as a positive signal from all of this is that there's attention to it now, which suggests there's something that can be done to mitigate systemic risks, and we can work in coalition to deliver on some of the resilience required for grappling with some of this complexity that we've just talked about. TIP itself is thinking about how do we build the movement for system level investing. And to that end, we just launched a product called the Systems Aware Investing Launchpad, which is sort of a SaaS platform for learning about system level investing and how to become a system level investor. We have a cohort of around 22 investors who are going to use that platform to learn how to be champions at their own institutions for this thought. That cohort launches literally next week. And TIP is coming out with, in a few short weeks, the Racial Inequity as a Systemic Risk issue brief. Because we need to talk about these systemic risks in order to be able to do something about these systemic risks.
Indeed. And more people in that movement is the best antidote to the backlash, as well as these systemic risks play out. I think tools like what you're talking about be ever more valuable.
Well, print that in our ad. Thank you, David, for joining me today on the podcast.
Always a pleasure, Monique. Thank you.
And that's going to do it for this week's Impact Briefing. Thanks to David and our producer, Isaac Silk. Ready to try Impact Alpha? Sign up for Impact Alpha Open, free of charge, directly at impactalpha.com. Want to go deeper? Grab a subscription and get full access to the site, Agents of Impact calls, and the daily email brief. Just go to impactalpha.com/subscribe and choose an annual subscription. Thank you for listening. I'm Monique Aiken, Managing Director for TIP, the Investment Integration Project. Be sure to check back for next week's briefing, and until then, take care.